Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I've been, my name's out there on multiple lists. So people can look up my address now and see where I live on a map, see where I work, see
Yeah.
everything about me. Hi, my name's Chad Eros.
So we don't know each other.
No.
Someone reached out to me and said that
Yep.
we should talk and we should connect. So I don't know what the story is, but you
Right.
are involved in the accounting for the Freedom Convoy. Do
Yes.
you want
I'm
to start
a
with
church.
a little background of who you are, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I am just a humble chartered professional accountant. Up until recently, I was teaching accounting at Saskatchewan Polytechnic. I teach international financial reporting standards, accounting standards for private enterprise, Canadian taxation, some finance classes, just things like that. Before that, I worked in commercial banking, and then I in BC actually. So I do recognize you and your
Mm,
voice and all of that. And congratulations on your new career, by the way.
thank you.
And welcome to
Thanks.
new careers. Welcome to the new career movement. I had a small public practice doing corporate and personal taxes, doing business consulting. And then I got into working with lawyers to help like restructure companies, settle lawsuits, a little bit of forensic accounting, stuff like that. So that's like my background. That's like my expertise and knowledge, things like that. And so how did I get involved in this? I have a friend who's like, we're all like birds of a feather flock together. A friend of mine from BC when I lived in BC, he basically has like a radio station against all these mandates and where the country's going, just how the mandates, the passport system, the social credit system that seems to be pervasively moving in on our culture, on our Western culture, and things like that. And he was hearing that Tamera Lich's group was having trouble communicating with GoFundMe in an effective way to release some funds that were being raised. He also set up like a volunteer group to be ready for the truckers when they arrived, providing like just the basics of life. When they got there, he was hoping and dreaming that he could help the truckers get food, shelter, get showered. I don't know, just like the necessities of life type of stuff.
Mhm.
And somehow he got linked together with the group, like Tamera Leach's group, which was raising money for the truckers. So he was there. He wanted to provide services for the truckers. Tamera Leach was raising money for the truckers. And of course, one thing led to another, and they ended up talking. And they told him, we just can't seem to say the right words to get GoFundMe to release any money. And then he said, I know a guy. And that guy was me, because I did stuff like that. Like I did business consulting to help raise money for profit businesses, like properly communicate just the finance part of the business, do projections, pro forma financial statements and management, just write-ups about the management of the company and things like that.
Mhm.
So they reached out to me and they said, hey, we heard you might be able to help us. Here's all the emails from GoFundMe. So they gave me everything that GoFundMe was telling them, all the questions, all the runaround, everything. So I reviewed it all. And I said, I think I know what they want. So I did a 1-page write-up with some charts in it and stuff like that, just really making it visually easy to read. And then $1 million got released. So they said, okay, we get it. We understand what you're trying to do here, but not so fast. They said they were going to release $1 million, but then it seems in their correspondence that they started to read the legacy news, and the legacy news was saying that they heard there was violence there, they heard there was racism there, they heard all this, and they started to get cold feet. So I started to see more correspondence come to this original committee that was trying to manage the fundraising and distribution of the funds. And they were forwarding that to me too.
What would have to be in that letter that you sent to GoFundMe? Was it like, here's how we're going to use the funds, here's who's receiving it?
No, that's a good question. What this original committee did, I guess I'll just back up a little bit. So from what I gathered from talking to the original committee and Tamera Leach, was Tamera started this little GoFundMe thing, never dreaming that it was going to become like the flagship, not only the flagship fundraiser for this whole thing, but like a symbol of the entire movement. Like it became something other than a fundraiser, because people were just constantly clicking and logging in just to get an update to watch the needle move on the fundraiser, because it was like they were cheering for it. Now they're like, go, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so every little $10 or $20 thing was just encouraging people that they weren't alone in thinking that there was something wrong with this whole government telling us what to do with our bodies. Otherwise, we can't have a job and get on a plane or get on a train and things like that. So it was just, that's what it became. She could have never predicted or thought in a million years that it would become this flagship thing. And so she reached out to some local people in her town in Medicine Hat, like a bookkeeper. And then there was there was a few other people on the committee that I never really talked to. And then another person who lived in BC. And they came up with a reimbursement rate, like a certain amount per kilometer that the truckers would get for their journey there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, you shouldn't let GoFundMe paint you into this corner of how you can use the money for the beneficiaries. You should include, and if we need to support them with food and shelter, or if the truck breaks down, maybe a truck will break down in the middle of the journey. So if they need help, things like that. But so I was just basically an advisor at first. And they decided to cut all the other stuff out and just give them the per kilometer reimbursement. And I said, ooh, you're painting yourself into a corner when you like limit the use of the funds.
Who made that decision? GoFundMe or
GoFundMe from the no, not Tamera, like the original, like she had a committee of people that were corresponding with GoFundMe. And Tamera, from what I saw, I never really saw her corresponding with GoFundMe at all. She was on the road doing the social media thing, like recording herself with the trucker that she was driving with, Chris Barber, and recording the crowds and just doing like a documentary style recording of the thing, which is essentially what propelled her into becoming like a social media phenomenon and basically turned her into the face of the convoy. And it never, like, that never really was supposed to happen. So back to the GoFundMe correspondence and fundraiser itself, and just like my involvement of how I got involved. GoFundMe then started saying things like, can you disavow this person and that person? Can you disavow racism? And can you put on your fundraiser that you're against violence and I'm just like, whoa, I'm like, okay. And they started to do stuff like that on the fundraiser. They put out a disavowal of Pat King. They said, yeah, we have nothing to do with Pat King and all this sort of thing. And I didn't know him from a hole in the ground. Like, I'm not a trucker. I'm an accounting teacher. I just started up Facebook yesterday. Like, I had Facebook a long time ago, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I deleted it because I thought it was a waste of time. I don't have things like that. So I didn't keep up on who these people were, but I highly recommend that you don't like disavow people as a part of your GoFundMe platform, just because people won't believe you anyway. Like, they'll just say, oh, sure you don't associate with this person. And if you say we're not racists, like, then you've got the word racism and this person's name on there. And we don't condone violence, and we don't do, but now you have the word violence on your GoFundMe fundraiser. It doesn't even matter if you're saying we don't like violence. The word violence is on your thing. And what are people going to remember when they read it? So I was like, I said, just tell them what you're going to do. Don't play this game with GoFundMe about disavowing stuff. So yeah, the committee kind of listened to me and took all the disavowals off. And I guess I went on a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but that's how we got to, I would say they kind of got painted into a corner by GoFundMe of what they could do with the money and stuff like that.
And at one point, $1 million was released, or they said they were going to release it, and if it was, where did that money go?
Yeah. Okay, great. I did end up talking with Tamera on the phone quite a bit after that, because she ended up calling me with a few other people asking for help on basically a structure for everything. Because like I said before, she only thought she was going to raise 20,000. Then by the time I was involved, I think they were up to like 5 or 6 million or something like that. It was pretty crazy. So I said, you should probably incorporate a nonprofit corporation. And then we were talking on the phone, and one of the other people said, I'll talk to my lawyers. They could probably get this done in a week. I said, oh, that's a pretty long time. I can just go on Incorporations Canada and incorporate this like in a half an hour. So I incorporated something on January 30th, 2022. And I just called it Freedom 2022 Human Rights and Freedoms. The original, when you incorporate something, there has to be at least one director. That was me. And then the person that hooked me up with them in the first place, I put that person as a director because they had an Ontario address. And then when you initially incorporate a corporation, it's the first directors really don't matter because you have to have your first meeting of the members. And then the members elect the first real operating board of directors. So what I did was I quickly applied to TD Bank for a bank account for the corporation so that the corporation could receive the $1 million. Okay. However, TD Bank never allowed that company to get a bank account. So before the $1 million was issued, I tried to make it so that a nonprofit corporation would receive it, which would have been a proper way for the money to be received. Because under the Nonprofit Act of Canada, the money would have been received into a corporation that was required to have an audit done and all the proper legislation in place to keep the corporation accountable and transparent. The nonprofit corporation wouldn't have charitable status, so it wouldn't be able to issue charitable receipts, but it wouldn't be a taxable entity, and it would have to provide services to the members or to society that was in line with its purpose. And so to get charitable status, you have to meet three very stringent.
It's difficult to do.
Things. Yeah, it is, because you have to be either a school, a church, or like a soup kitchen, something like that. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, I wanted to set up the proper mechanism so that the money could be received properly, but they wouldn't do it. The bank would not open up a bank account so that the money could be received properly. And then the $1 million, instead of going to the nonprofit the way that we wanted it to go, it got released into Tamera's personal bank account, which was not what we wanted to happen, obviously. And then she was afraid to touch it. She didn't do anything with the money. And so then TD froze the $1 million and it got handed over to the courts. So she got the money, but it was frozen by TD, and then TD handed it over to the courts. And the reason why that happened, their reason is that $1 million of funds being received on behalf of other people is a violation of the agreement, like the terms and conditions of her checking account, because she's supposed to use the checking account for herself only and not on behalf of other people. But then, of course, I was arguing. I said, how can you do that? We tried to open a bank account so it would be received properly in the first place. You wouldn't let us. Then it's almost like you made the money go into a personal account, and then it got frozen, and then you handed it over to the courts. So
does that feel like that was done on purpose?
I don't know. It seems fishy to me. Like it definitely doesn't seem right. That's for sure. I've been introduced to this phrase, don't attribute to malice what you could more easily attribute to incompetence. But there seems to be this indication of, I've been in banking, I've been in finance, I've been in accounting. It just seems very odd. And then I started applying for bank accounts at all kinds of banks and credit unions. They wouldn't open one for me. They wouldn't open a bank account for this nonprofit organization.
So you were trying to start your own nonprofit.
I was just trying to open a bank account for Freedom 2022 Human Rights and Freedoms, the one that I incorporated on January 30th, which I did so that the money would be received properly. So I was going to all kinds of banks saying, hey, will you open a bank account for this nonprofit? And they were saying, no, this is too controversial for us, and we don't want to open a bank account for it. And then finally, some credit union in Manitoba did open a bank account, and there was one in Saskatchewan that was in the process of opening a bank account for us. And
because of the headlines in the news,
yep,
saying there's violence there, racist, the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so basically it's all this money's being raised in GoFundMe and we don't even have a place to put it. And then no, like really. And then GoFundMe announced that they're shutting down the campaign and they're going to choose who they're going to give it to. I don't know if you remember that. And then there was a big backlash against that. And then GoFundMe finally said, okay, we're just gonna refund the donors. Now that happened after me and a group of lawyers, we got together and we talked to GoFundMe. And I basically explained to GoFundMe what I just told you. There's an incorporated company that's going to have abide by the Nonprofit Act laws, have an audit, and be transparent. The next day, GoFundMe announced that they were shutting it down. It didn't seem to matter that there was 5 lawyers, a chartered professional accountant, all of us working to make sure that everything would be transparent, legal. All that mattered to them was what the legacy media was reporting, that this that there was racist and violence and all sorts of things. Yeah. Can you imagine? There was protests where this protest had people shoveling the sidewalks, picking up garbage, cleaning the streets. There was tables of food. There was so much food. There was toques and mitts and scarves and long johns and parkas and everything for free. All this was free, given out to protesters who look cold, homeless people. I looked around. This was like a family event. There was fireworks. There was kids everywhere. It made me miss my kids because I was seeing kids all over the place. Oh man, I came out here to help, and like bouncy castles and all sorts of stuff. So what people were reading in the legacy media versus what was real was incredibly false. There was a huge Indian contingent there, races across the spectrum. And when I first got there, I could hear an Indian band beating on drums on Parliament Hill. And I was excited. I'm like, wow, everybody's here. Like Aboriginals, every race, every culture, and we're all here for the same purpose. No more government passport system, like no more, because a lot of people are now talking like, what's the next passport? Okay, it was a vaccine passport. Well, what's the next one? What's the next one? Well, that's what people are concerned about. So yeah, like back to what you said, none of that racism stuff, none of that's true. Yeah.
What happens from there? So the $1 million is in, her account gets frozen. They take the money, goes to the courts. There's still all the rest of this money still in there. At that point, GoFundMe shuts it down.
Yep.
Then there's a new fundraiser. What was that one called?
Give, Send, Go. Yeah, Give, Send, Go.
So were you involved in that one as well?
Yeah. When I was still in Moose Jaw, there was people. This is interesting. Tamera got to Ottawa on the Convoy, and we went on there. I was trying to talk to her about things and she said, well, I got to go on this Zoom call with the lawyers. And I was the guy who incorporated the nonprofit. And I said, well, I should be there. So I jumped in the Zoom call and there was lawyers from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom on the call. Keith Wilson, who is Brian Peckford's lawyer, was on the call. And then there was some other people who represented other nonprofit organizations. And it seemed to me from her phone calls that she was being pulled in every which direction. And after that phone call, I said to her, who are you there with? Are you there with anybody that what's the longest you've known anybody? Are there people there that you trust? And she's not really, no. And I'm like, you should get somebody out there. You shouldn't be alone. And so her and I started to talk and get to know each other. And I was really concerned with her because she was telling me that she was being pulled all over the place. There's a $10 million in this bank account. And then I spoke to from the JCCF after that. And we were talking about how they were going to get out there, whether or not I was going to go too. And I ended up finding like a chartered plane for the lawyers to get on to go over there. Just by talking to a friend of a friend, I found out there was a chartered airline that was flying people out there. And so I'm like, hey, you guys could probably get on this plane and go out there. And we arranged for that. So the flight was in progress. It came from Edmonton. It picked up, I think it started with Keith Wilson, went down, picked up some JCCF lawyers. And while it was en route, Tamera was like crying and saying, do you think you could get my husband on the flight? She said, I need somebody here. And I'm like, I'm like, I'll see if I can do that. I contacted the pilot and I said, can you go to Medicine Hat and can you touch down in Medicine Hat and pick up her husband? He's like, yeah, sure. Then Tamera phoned me at work and said, I need you to get here. I feel like I'm in a shark tank with like sharks circling me, pulling me. And she said at one point, she goes, when this lady pulled on my arm and said, we got to get into makeup because we want you to do a press release. And she's, what are you talking about? Like, she said, you need to get here. And I'm like, Tamera, I'm going to lose my job. Like, how am I going to come there? I'm like, I just taught an accounting class. What am I supposed to do? And she said, can you come here, please? Well, and I'm like, this is a cause I believed in too. So you got to understand that an hour before, she's begging me to come there to be with her, to help her and to bring her husband because she feels like she's in a shark tank. And I'm like, screw this. I'm going to go. This is a big deal in the history of Canada, in the history of the world. I phoned the pilot and he rerouted the plane down from Saskatoon to come to Regina. I packed my bags, or no, I didn't pack my bags. My wife packed my bags for me. I came home and came home. She had my bags packed and she's go get them. She's against this way more than I am. All these mandates and passports and stuff. So I hopped on this little plane. We were all packed in like sardines. The pilot told me how much do you weigh? And I'm like 215 pounds. He goes, oh, can you sit up on the right side to balance the plane out? I'm like, okay, sure. So the reason why I'm telling that story is because there's this like the mainstream media is saying that Tamera's husband got flown out on a private jet.
Right.
And people are latching onto that and saying that there's big money behind this. And there's like foreign money and there's all these nefarious foreign entities involved. And I'm like, all I've been dealing with is bookkeepers from Medicine Hat who don't know how to talk to GoFundMe properly. And by the way, if an accounting teacher from Saskatchewan Polytechnic is Tamera's only hope at helping her navigate the shark tank, I'm sorry. I don't want to be self-deprecating, right? Like lots of people want to put themselves out as being more important than they really are. But that's like the heart of this Tamera Lich thing. And so she was denied bail because they think she's such a threat to like society. And really, she's just becoming a scapegoat. She's a victim of her own rapid popularity because of social media. She's a genuine person. I think she's a good person. I met her husband, Dwayne. He's a really great guy. He got put on the plane because there was already a plane of lawyers en route. They touched down in Medicine Hat, picked him up, touched down in Regina, picked me up. And then I flew out with the lawyers and we had a really productive flight. Like it was a working flight where I explained a lot of what I'm explaining to you to them. And then we worked on how we were going to communicate to GoFundMe the next day, which we did, which basically it didn't really matter how good of a case we put forward to the due diligence that we were doing to make sure everything would be legitimate. They just shut it down anyway because of their political alignment and because of them choosing to buy into a narrative that really wasn't true.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever figure out who some of those people were? There some people that maybe had, because there are rumors of people infiltration into the group and they try to steer a movement. It happens all the time. They try to steer a movement in a certain political way. Was some of that happening?
Yeah, like I said, she showed up with no team, no one around her, but with a $10 million fundraiser. And I talked to the regional committee, like the bookkeeper in Medicine Hat, and I said, will you go out there? Like, can you go? Before I went, I was trying to get other people to go. Not that I didn't want to go. I wanted to. It would have been great for me to go. I just was trying to reconcile how I'm supposed to do that and have a job. But the people, there was a bunch of nonprofits there with different names. And I think a lot of them had genuine desires to contribute. I think there was a genuine desire to end mandates and passports and the social credit system and that whole thing. But human nature struggles with acknowledgement, pride, building your own brand and things like that. So I think there was this struggle, and a struggle to have the face of the fundraiser and the convoy be affiliated with them. And she could feel that. And I was telling her, like, how about there was a group there that got set up to receive the truckers when they got there. They were there first. I said, why don't you link up with that group? If you don't have a team, how about that be your team? This was the team that the friend of a friend that got me involved in the first place. And so when I got out there, I said, look, let's go hang out at that headquarters, which just basically deals with like food, showers, porta potties, whatever, that sort of thing. Like totally not political, just kind of like necessities of life, humanitarian aid type stuff. I'm like, how about that be your team? When we created the first board of directors, the guy who started that team ended up as a director on Freedom 2022, Human Rights and Freedoms. And it was Tamera, Lich, me as the treasurer, and then another guy as the secretary. I'm not saying these other people's names. I do know their names, but I don't know. I'm just going to leave them off. People can look them up anyways. And then the membership were truckers, and there was also truckers on the board of directors as well. So I was like, that's who the members elected as their board. And the guy who created Adopt a Trucker, which is that organization was that set up before the guys even got there to receive them and provide them with the necessities of life type stuff. Yeah. And that kind of married or merged Tamera together with them, like her group, Chris Barb group, like of truckers that he knew. And then this humanitarian aid type thing. That was a nice merger. And then after that, like other groups just seemed to drop off and leave her alone, which was great for her. Yeah. That allowed her to stop getting pulled into meetings and people trying to put makeup on her to put her in front of like media and stuff like that. And then she just started to go out and mix with the protesters and encourage them. And she actually is like a charismatic, caring person. She actually really cares about the cause. Like with my conversations with her, I got that from her. I flew out and I don't have a job now because of all this, but I'm not worried about it. I've been self-employed before, and I think I'm going to do okay with my practice again, that I'm going to fire up. So yeah, that's what happened there. I think maybe you might be alluding to the Pat King thing, or maybe was he ever a part of the Tamera, Lich, Chris Barber group? He never was considered to be a member in Freedom 2022. He never was considered to be a director. He had no say and no vote on anything. Like, I'm just telling you like the facts. Not that I want to badmouth any human being in the world. Like, life is a journey and we all have to grow and stuff like that. So I have no desire to like badmouth anybody.
There's a bunch of different things floating around, like the when or why was BJ involved? I don't know if
I don't really know him too much. I was around him and met with him. I don't know if you know what happened to him, but after a meeting, he walked outside of the hotel at the Arc, wiped out on the ice and broke his leg and had to have reconstructive surgery during all of this. So I was just there with him and helped him get into a car, go to the ambulance, made sure he was okay. That happened. And then I ended up in some meetings with him after that too. And I've been learning about like why people might be concerned about him. Like you got to understand, do I not these mandates and things like that? Yeah. But I don't know. I didn't know about BJ, and you probably know more about him than I do, to tell you the truth. But
I've just been, there's so much information every day and so many different theories about this. Will eventually become a movie on Netflix. Guaranteed. Right. You'll be a character. Yeah. This interview might be might help them write the script.
Oh, I know. So so BJ Dichter was originally not on the GoFundMe fundraiser. I don't know if you knew that. Only Tamera Lich's name was on it. When I first got involved with helping them properly communicate to GoFundMe to get $1 million released, only Tamera Lich's name was on it. And then afterward, like after I helped, all of a sudden his name popped up on it. And my wife was like, who's that guy? And I'm like, I don't know. And then like Googled his name and I was like, yeah, okay. He had a history of political stuff. And
I wonder how he got involved in the first place.
when we had the meeting with GoFundMe, you got to understand something about me. I can be very direct and brash, and I think that's okay. I think any like chartered professional accountant worth their salt who's supposed to identify fraud and risk of horrible error, a big part of our job is to protect assets and make sure they don't disappear. So I just ask pointed questions. Do you trust this person? Do you know this person? Tamera said that she trusted BJ with her life. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, how long have you known him? That sort of thing. Apparently she felt comfortable that she knew him well enough. And he ended up being on the board of directors for Freedom 2022, Human Rights and Freedoms. So yeah.
I don't know what the truth is about any of this stuff, but I just know he disappeared. He was the guy like that was appearing on Tucker Carlson and all these different big mainstream news spots. And then I expected when everything went down this past weekend in Ottawa that he was going to come out and make a statement or say something. And so we never heard from him again. And I was curious about that.
Well, I'm glad you talked about that, because before there was any real formal structure, I would say that he asserted himself as the main spokesperson. And before I flew to Ottawa, I watched the first press conference, I'll say in quotes, where him, Chris Barber, and Tamera Lich were sitting together, and he did most of the talking. And I was like, who is that guy? Like, why is he doing most of the talking? And I think Tamera spoke just a little bit in that interview. And that was the part that I remembered the most, because she talked about how people were suffering under these current mandates, and she broke down crying, and she seemed really sincere. BJ did a lot of talking. He has a way and a belief of communicating in which he feels that making fun of how stupid things are the way to expose the madness kind of thing. That's his way, but I really liked Tamera's sincere approach to telling stories about people and how they're suffering and breaking down in tears about it and things like that. So that's what I remember about that interview. And then I wondered who he was and why he was being the spokesperson. But then once things formalized, and even just recently, I got to tell you, we're saying we got to really be careful who's gonna show up in a press conference and be the official spokesperson Freedom 2022. Even right now, I would say that I'm doing this on my own accord. I'm just telling my origin story as a chartered professional accountant. I ended up, and just to elaborate on that, we're talking about spokespeople right now. Who's Benjamin Dichter? Why is he the spokesperson? Who is the board of directors? I initially wanted to stay a third-party professional advisor. And then the lawyers and some other people were like, we need a treasurer. Who the heck else is going to be the treasurer the most about the finances? You're the one who incorporated this. You're the one who was talking to the banks, trying to set up bank accounts. And you're the only one we trust to be the treasurer. And I'm like, okay, sure. I'm not saying that to distance myself from the movement, because I absolutely 100% do believe that there was government overreach. I have kids. They've suffered from this. It's horrible. But yeah, it would be so I flew out with the lawyers, and then it would be one of the lawyers becoming a part of the board of directors. Well, they no longer could say that they're third party anymore. So yeah, anyways, the BJ Dichter thing, he is a board member. Tamera said she trusts him. So you said that he dropped off as a spokesperson. That's because once things formalized, we started to say, yeah, you won't be speaking for us unless it's approved. So the board started to say, here's how formal communications are going to be issued. We're going to have letterhead. And even up until yesterday, communications were still coming out that weren't approved by the board. And the lawyers and me had to crack the whip on, look, you can't do that anymore. Stop. If you're good, you speaking of disavowal, we're going to have to disavow any communications that go out that isn't approved by the board. And now I'm starting to make myself nervous, because it's yeah, there's this organization, Freedom 2022, Human Rights and Freedoms. But even at that, we are not the organizers of the convoy of we are just the like stewards of the fundraiser, and that other group that linked up with us that was helping with like food and porta potties and stuff like that too, right? How the trucks got to Ottawa, where they parked, how they parked, all of that stuff, that was all up to each individual trucker. And there was no way that anybody could ever claim to be the mastermind behind a convoy from all across Canada to Ottawa. That was all done over the CB radio by the truckers. Hey boys, I'm going to Ottawa. Who's coming with me? I'm coming. It was all completely grassroots. And for anybody to claim that that would be quite the human mind that could plan this. You could have 50 years to plan this and you still wouldn't be able to do it. It just sprung up from the ground, from the grassroots. And then people came to Ottawa, like all the truckers came to Ottawa. And just to put in perspective how unplanned this was, when all the truckers got to Ottawa, they drove around not knowing where to go. There was like mass chaos, truckers bumping into each other. A lot of them wanted to get to Parliament Hill because they thought that was the prime real estate to protest at, which I mean, essentially is that you want to be right in front of your MPs saying you're not doing your jobs for us, that sort of thing. Some people got stuck on side streets and just parked there, just ended up parking. Like, I guess this is where I am. And like, It was just mass chaos. And,
wow.
and then the police came in behind them and started setting up barricades. So then they got trapped where they were. They couldn't even leave if they wanted to, because there was like concrete barriers in front of them. There was police like all sorts of police vehicles all around the city, blocking off bridges, blocking off roads. So for any organization or for any person to say, oh yeah, that was all me, I planned that whole thing. It's no, you didn't plan any. All the best any organization or nonprofit could do was go there and try and help in some way. Like for instance, you may have seen like Danny Bulford and a guy named Tom Razzo. They would come on and say, okay, we talked to some trucker leaders, or who they thought were maybe leaders, and we talked to the police, and we could arrange, maybe we could move some of these truckers off the side streets and get them in front of Parliament Hill so that they're not bugging the residents. Just people trying to liaise between the police and the truckers as successful as they possibly could be. And then sometimes I would wince when I would see some people say, we spoke with the police and we are going to move the truckers here or there. And I'm like, brother, you wish. Like, you're making yourself out to be a spokesperson for the convoy, and you ain't. Like, you are not. I like, me being on the inside, knowing just like this chaos, it's like nobody represents all these truckers and all these factions of truckers. And some people say that there would be like a captain of 15 here and a captain of 20 over here, and then just a bunch of people who were identified with nobody, like just there on their own. They don't know anybody. They just heard there was a convoy and went. That all said, talking about spokespeople and who the leaders are and all that sort of thing, the feds really want there to be a leader so that they can make an example out of somebody. And unfortunately, right now, that's Tamera Lich. And she was denied bail. And like I said, she's a victim of her own rapid stardom, I would say. And it's not right. It's not right what's going on. They're completely and utterly scapegoating this person. And I can 100% vouch for that.
The fact that it was painted as such a violent and racist movement from the get-go, is there a thought that goes through your mind that says, man, Trudeau just wanted to go for that Emergencies Act? Like, it has to be, yeah. like it was almost premeditated.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have proof of that. So you know how I said some people were trying to liaise between like the police and the truckers. What happened was we had a meeting, and the lawyers helped craft this letter that got distributed to a lot of the truckers. We printed it up and basically said, hey, truckers, get off the side streets. We talked to the mayor, of the city of Ottawa, and he's agreed to move the blockades to allow you to move your trucks to Wellington Street in front of Parliament. And so we were handing this sheet out to the truckers. And so, but it was up to the police to move their barricade to allow them to do this, right? You know how I said they got trapped into their to places they couldn't even leave if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing the trucks to get off the residential areas, you know, because that was a big part of the chief of police and the mayor saying, "Oh, you guys are terrorists. You're in our residential neighborhoods." We were mobile, I shouldn't even say we were mobilizing. We just passed out pieces of paper that said, "Hey, please mobilize to get out of these residential areas or side streets." They started to do it, and then the police shut it down, and they wouldn't let them get off the side streets. And the next day, the Emergencies Act was invoked. They basically staged the Emergencies Act. That's what I think. I cannot reconcile in my head why they wouldn't let the trucks move. And then that was the impetus. That's the whole, you know, if the trucks all got to move and get off and unclog the streets, then they wouldn't have had a reason the next day to invoke the Emergencies Act. What a dirty scumball move to do. I know I was one of the people handing out the papers the day before, talking to the truckers, "Hey, you know, go to Wellington, get off this street," you know, and then it was a very cold day. It was like minus 35. We were all freezing our buns off out there, trying to tell the truckers, you know, move. Then they wouldn't let them. And then the next day, the Emergencies Act was enacted, and there was all this, you know, this flamboyant speech from the new chief of police, Bell. You know, get off our city, and you're clogging up our streets, and all this stuff. And I'm just like sitting there with my mouth open, going, "We were trying to get not to, but you wouldn't let us, and now you're saying this." So, yeah, it is.
So what do you think's going on? Just your own personal 50,000 foot view of what's just transpired. You were like in the eye of the storm. They really wanted to pass this Emergencies Act. What do you think is going on?
Like a lot of Canadians and a lot of, I think, free-thinking people around the world realize is that these passports, these mandates, what happened? Everyone had their rights taken away from them, and the only way you could get them back was to do what the government said. And the government said, get vaccinated. If you get vaccinated, you can have your rights back. And you were issued a passport saying, I have my rights back. I'm allowed to go on a plane, on a train, go to a movie. And a lot of us said, that's a foot in the door for the next passport. That's a foot in the door for the government telling you what to do in order to get your rights back or keep your rights. So that's the passport thing. That's why everybody went to protest to Ottawa, right? For that reason. People are saying that they went there to overthrow the government. I just went for dinner with my wife tonight. We were talking to a waitress, and she says that from what she's read, that the protesters went to Ottawa to overthrow the government. No, they went there to protest the mandates and passport system, and to say stop that. So that's a lot of people believe around the world that's a foot in the door for the government telling you what to do with your body. And if you don't do what they say with your body, they're going to take your rights away. Now, and that foot in the door is so worth it to the government that nobody came out to talk to us. Nobody came out to say, hey, guys, this isn't about that. It's strictly and purely about safe and healthy. We really believe that these mandates are going to save people's lives and save the day. But it would have been hard for them to say that because the science now proves that people who get their third booster shot can still get COVID and pass it on to people. So they couldn't come out with a straight face and say that. So what do? They don't try and reconcile their actions with science. they just doubled down. Lawsuits, court orders, blocking the truckers from moving. And then the next day, the Emergencies Act, just complete and total.
They had a mission to get that in, and nothing was going to stop them.
Nothing's going to stop them. And this dictatorship way of ruling and telling people what to do in order to have their rights, so worth it to them that they did these things and resulted in what some people would just call martial law, right? Like the police, after the Emergency Act was invoked, they started removing people from Ottawa, ordering them out. You're only allowed to be there if you live there or you're there on business. And this is the nation's capital. This is Canada's national capital. A Canadian citizen isn't allowed to be in our national capital unless we live there or we're on business. Just imagine that. And they were called occupiers. They weren't called protesters. A Canadian citizen was occupying their own capital. Okay. That's an interesting thing. I thought I was welcome here. I thought I was a Canadian citizen. I didn't realize this was the King's town. I'm sorry that His Majesty's loyal subject isn't welcome in his town and his guards have to kick us out. Wow. So we're not protesters, we're occupiers. We're there to overthrow him. I guess if he equates the passport system being expunged to him being overthrown, I guess he defines his whole entire prime ministership by that passport. He said it, we didn't. You know?
Are you following like the themes of the Great Reset and World Economic Forum and this is Justin's been told to deliver Canada to Klaus Schwab on a silver platter? Are you into any of that?
Yeah. Years ago, I started to realize things about our banking system and how society's controlled through currency and things like that. So I did start looking into that sort of thing a while ago. I think anybody who's a little bit scholarly, like beyond just doing like the rudimentary tasks in their jobs, start like looking into the mechanics of things, will start to find these things out. But then as the more and more bizarre experiences you have, like what the best success that we had, the most success that the protesters have was that we truly revealed their hand, right? Like just how important it is for them to have this foot in the door. It is so vital and so important that they would invoke what used to be called the War Measures Act, where it's supposed to be that the nation's sovereignty is at risk. So the nation's sovereignty is at risk because we don't agree with the passport system. Like, how do they reconcile that with us? Like, how do they? Like, okay, then what is our nation then? Is Canada sovereign? Who's in control? Is Justin Trudeau even in control? Who ordered him to give the go-ahead to invoke the emergency? Did he really? Is his government really in control anymore? And then like yesterday, I saw a chart of all the people who are members in the World Economic Forum that are members of parliament and in his cabinet and
Jagmeet Singh.
Yeah. Is the NDP and the Liberal Party, are they really two different parties? Maybe they're not. Is Jagmeet Singh really that shallow and superficial that he would side with Trudeau on invoking the Emergencies Act because he doesn't want to trigger an election? Really? That should be worth triggering an election, not the other way around. Like it's that flippant of a decision to him. I'm going to side with Trudeau because we don't want to trigger an election. Like, sir, Jagmeet Singh, sir, that is absolutely worth triggering an election over.
Yeah.
Martial law, the War Measures Act, people having their rights taken away from them, not being allowed to buy, sell, or trade because their bank accounts are shut down. That's not worth triggering an election over. Then what is? These people are like, wow. The what comes to mind is Marie Antoinette's famous saying when people said to her, "Your people are starving. They don't have any bread to eat." And then she says, "They don't have any bread to eat. We'll let them eat cake." Well, she was completely and totally out of touch with the people. And that saying that became like a flagship saying that triggered the French Revolution. So is Jagmeet Singh really that out of touch with reality that He thinks that the Emergency Act or War Measures Act, I can say that because that's the old word. I know they're two different legislations, but
it just seems like he's also following the same orders than Justin Trudeau is. Because of course these guys they know what they're doing. I've interviewed Jagmeet Singh. This is a couple years ago when he was still like cool, like in GQ magazine and all that stuff. I'm like, man, this guy's like the man. This guy's cool. And now I look back and I go, oh, but he's got his finger on the pulse. Like we would talk about new music and all sorts of things. So it's not like he's disconnected from what's even happening culturally, like on the street. So to use that as an excuse would be crazy. So yeah, they know what they're doing. They're just clearly following orders. Their name was called. Okay, guys, let's get this Emergencies Act thing in, and let's get the passports federally done coast to coast.
His reason for siding with Trudeau, that they didn't want to trigger an election, that's the political equivalent to chewing bubblegum and twirling your hair. Oh, I didn't want to trigger an election. Like, oh, that's the worst thing that could happen. How about the worst thing that could happen is that the government gets dictatorship rule over the country? The Emergency Act is basically a suspension from democracy.
Yeah. But
he's worried about triggering an election. That should ruin him and a democratic country. That should that bimbo-ness. It's just so bad. Anyways, enough of that guy. That, like, the 1,000-foot view is, Trudeau said it himself, and he said he was joking. Okay, but I don't know if he was. I believe in Freudian slips. Like when he said, I admire China because of how a dictatorship can result in getting things done faster, or whatever he said in that one quote. Sir, you are supposed to be a politician in a democratic society. Those words should never pass through your lips, that you admire dictatorships. That's the antithesis to democracy. I admire dictatorships because of how quickly they can get things done. He also said other comments in regards to detesting national sovereignty types thing. I don't know what he was trying to get at there, but he was one world government type goals and things like that. He has an obsession with, it seems like, the UN. But this is all coming from a guy that got involved in all this because of my accounting and finance expertise. And I'm basically telling you my origin story. You ask my opinion on what I think's going on globally. It's just one man's opinion. I really hope that certain people aren't scapegoated, and I really hope that all these like conspiracy theories get squished. Like people say Tamera took off with $1 million. I know she didn't. I know that got scooped. It's gone. She never touched a penny of it. She's in jail right now. She doesn't get any bail. She's a social media star, and they're scapegoating her because they're desperate for there to be someone they can publicly flog and crucify to make an example out of them, so no one ever questions or
protests again.
Protests again. I know that to be a fact. That her husband was flying around on a private jet. One, which isn't true. It was like a dual prop plane that I had to sit on one of the sides to make sure it was on balance. That was an interesting plane ride. And what else is there? There's that they were trying to overthrow the government. Like what? With bouncy castles and children playing and free food. And what was another one? Oh, it was a white supremacist movement. I believe that guy with the swastika and the mask was a plant. Nobody knows who he is. He never showed up ever again. And Trudeau just harped on that over and over. Swastika. There's a swastika. Oh, yeah, sure. Your guy showed up with a swastika and never came back. That's my theory. I don't even know what to say. You had to be there. There was like all the different races and communities that were there. I've got videos of Aboriginal people saying there's absolutely no way this is a racist movement. I'm accepted here. I'm here for the same reason everybody else is, and on. Like, it just, So
that's what you wanted to say is, listen, this was a small grassroots thing for a few people in a small town who wanted to help make a change with the mandates, and it blew up.
And unfortunately for the powers that be, the people truly did rise up from the grassroots. And if you're going to scapegoat this 5'1" Métis girl who has an actual Métis status card. She's not, like I saw in one news article, they said she's a Métis person. Like, this is one of the mainstream media newspapers. A Métis person When I asked for her ID to set up the bank account for the nonprofit, she gave me her Métis status card. I have a picture of it. She's not a Métis person. Okay. Just like that too. There's just everything is completely and utterly debunked. And so what? She's the leader of white supremacist movement, and she's a Métis person with the status card. Like they've got nothing. Like, and I'm a Johnny come lately to this too. Like I was brought in to help out with the finance and just coming in and figuring things out and looking at who's who. And I'm like, and then I'm reading the news articles. I was like giggling at first and throwing my head back in laughter, but it's hard to like giggle and laugh at this now that she's denied bail and she's in jail like indefinitely. Like it's absolutely horrendous, really. There's nothing really to giggle or laugh about anymore. We were laughing about it before. We're like, oh, what's so threatening about this movement? Was it the bouncy castles? Was it the ice? What was it? The hockey games that were breaking out, or all the little kids playing and the fireworks and the music and all the Canadian flags, which, by the way, in Canada is now a symbol of insurrection. Did you notice that? Flying a Canada flag in Canada is now offensive. And employers are telling their employees to stop flying their Canada flags and like take them down before they get to work, because that's become a symbol of insurrection. Have you?
I've heard similar things, like the word freedom now is a word used by racists.
Yeah.
I've heard that one. I didn't hear the Canadian flag one. Wow, man.
My eyes were truly opened. Like every minute I'm involved in this time in Canadian history, my eyes are being opened as to the way people see things and
the manipulation of, the legacy media and the government and everything else.
Oh yeah. It's just, I'm like, wow, I've only been back for a day and I'm back in my home province. I'm going for dinner with my wife. And I'm finding out what people believe in my home province. And I'm a 5th generation Saskatchewan person. And I'm listening to people tell me this from my home province when I get back. It feels like I was in a war. And I come back from the war and they're saying, oh yeah, you guys were the bad guys or whatever. And I'm just like, what have you heard? Who are you listening to? Because Mark Twain said, it's easier to trick someone than it is to convince them that they were tricked. Once you're trying to convince someone that they were tricked, you're saying you're not as smart as you think you were. And people don't really want to admit that.
Exactly. Wow. Are you in touch with Tamera now?
I can't. No one can talk to her. Like, she can't even take visitors. I think she's being isolated and broken down. And honestly, even if she sung like a canary, even if she's told them everything, there's really nothing to tell. Like I said to the lawyers and to the board, I said, you know what we should do? We should give all the donors their money back. Like, we should do that. But did you know that the court order that was issued against the nonprofit indicates that I can't do that? If I give the money back to all the donors, I'll go to jail, because that money is set aside for us to be sued by the class action lawsuit by some people in Ottawa. So they want that money. The people that are suing the nonprofit want that money. So I'm not allowed to give it back to the donors. I can't give it back or I'll go to jail. What does that say about the class action lawsuit? What does that say about the court order? And by the way, that court order was made ex parte or whatever, it's some legal term, which means they made it without our counsel present. Our counsel wasn't even there to defend the nonprofit. They weren't allowed to be there. They weren't even allowed to know about that judgment when it was made without our knowledge and without us having representation in the court. We found out about that later. So last night I'm texting and I'm saying to the lawyers, like, we got to give the money back to the donors. That way there's nothing to fight about. That way nobody can say it was about the money. That way, which it never was. The truckers got in their convoy with $0 in the bank. This fundraiser was a miracle. right? It was a phenomenon. And like I said, it was a symbol that people were cheering for so that they didn't feel isolated and alone in their thoughts on this issue. So it never was about the money. And I just said, let's just further prove it wasn't. But my lawyer said, Chad, reread the court order. You can't do that. If you do anything with the money, you'll go to jail, put the board of directors at risk of going to jail, and I will have to quit being your lawyer because you wouldn't take my legal advice, so much so that you guys landed yourself in the position you're in going to jail. I'm like, I can't give the money back? Nope, you can't. It's set aside for the people that want the money, that are part of this class action lawsuit.
So now what? Now what? You just got, obviously you're going to have some time with your family. You got 12 kids. You got,
yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
I don't know. I Googled a little bit about me, but that's true. We have 12 kids and a foster kid. One of my kids is married, and she doesn't live with us anymore, obviously. And, but yeah, that's true. So I'm just back. There's these weird lawsuits and court orders. There's like now close to $13 million Canadian in the Give, Send, Go account. We have to figure out if we can free that up and use the funds for the intended purposes, because the donors gave it for a cause. We have beneficiaries, which are the truckers, which basically did a great job of shining a light on just how deep and significant these passports and mandates and social credit system is. So important to them that they would invoke the Emergencies Act, basically installing what looks like a dictatorship. It sparked protests around the world and in multiple countries. There's a huge convoy in the US now. We'll see how they deal with that one. See if they learned anything from Trudeau. We'll see how the American politicians react. I'm sure they took notes there. And yeah, I'm going to continue. This has become a permanent thing. This protest could have been a temporary thing if the government would have said, you know what, we see how important this is. There's protests around Canada and we absolutely disagree. They could have said, we don't like that the borders got shut down. That wasn't good. But we see how this is affecting people. We're going to end these mandates. But no. And I wonder if the US is going to like look at Canada and go, wow, they could have just made that protest temporary, but instead they created a permanent movement that's global. But and they did. They absolutely did. You know what? They could. Here's some things. If I was on the other side, if I was like for the mandates, for the passports, if I was a member of the World Economic Forum, do you know what I would have done? But they didn't do this. I would have let us have the money. And I would have watched to see how every single penny was spent. And if one penny was spent wrong, I would have hopped on it. But they didn't think of that. I don't get that. It's too late now. They can't do it anymore. And the other thing I would have done was, and this would have like totally took the wind out of the protest sail. I would have came out 1 week into the protest, or maybe like a few days in, after everybody came from across the nation and drove to Ottawa. I would have walked out of the front steps of Parliament and I would have said, oh, here's a piece of paper that says we were going to end the mandate next week. You guys totally overreacted. What are you doing here? And totally made a fool out of all the protesters. And it would have been a lie. They could have backdated it and said, you guys are nuts. Like, we were going to end this like next week, but they didn't do that. They completely doubled and tripled and quadrupled down and made themselves look like dictators. It's like it's who is advising these people? Like, I am not a genius political strategist, but I could think of a million ways to totally make fools out of people and squish all this. Oh, by the way, I'll tell you this. After they shut down the bank accounts and made it illegal for us to use the money, people started donating in front of a stage. They just started pouring money, cash, onto the stage. People coming to Ottawa from all over Canada just started pouring money on the stage. And so I'm sitting in the conference room where we are, and all of a sudden people come in and just threw a bunch of money on the table at me. And they're like, what do we do with this? Because I'm the accountant, right? I'm the finance guy. and they just dump like a mountain of money in front of me. And I'm like, I don't know, count it. So I'm like, somebody print a bank deposit form, like the commercial type things, and let's count the money. How many fives, tens, 20s, whatever, hundreds. So we like printed out a form, and then we knew how much money there was. And then they're like, now what? Now what do we do with it? Like, I'm just making this up, right? I'm like, put it in envelopes, $500 each. People and then we'll go hand it out to the truckers, because people are giving it to support the truckers. So we did that too. And like, the people that I was involved with, they were so upright, so honest, afraid to touch the money, afraid to be like, even look like they took a dime. This one trucker said, so we're handing out $500 to the truckers, right? Because it came in on this table, it was for them. And one person that was handing the money out said that somebody reached over top of them as they were handing out $500, and they were giving like thousands of dollars. Like they would give like that. And this one trucker said somebody gave him $15,000, and he said, I am being changed. I'm a different man now because of this convoy. I got $15,000. And he said, before this, I would have taken the money and I would have said, thanks, see ya. But I took the $15,000 and I handed it out to people that I knew were suffering. And he said, I'm different now. I wouldn't have done that before. That's what some of these truckers' stories are. Like, yeah, there's going to be a Netflix movie or whatever. I don't know. But the truckers need to tell their stories too, because a lot of their lives are changed. A lot of people feel like they're better people from this. There's just these characterizations of terrorism and racism and all this stuff. It's the complete opposite. It's the antithesis of that. People feel like they're better people from this now, not worse. Anyways, I could leave it on that note.
Man, what a joy to hear you relive that whole thing. And it's great to clear up all the misconceptions and stuff. But wow.
I have faith in the goodness of people. Like I said, people became better people out of this, and I think we're all going to be okay.
Chad, you rock, man. Thank you.
Thank you too.